nice spring day. Welcome to the Trails and Rails Museum's regular speaker series, Fabulous Friday. My name is Lena Homburger-Cordia, and I'm just going to give us a couple of brief introductions about the museum before we get going and what's going on here, particularly with our exhibits. And then we're going to have one of our Fab Friday crew, Robin Smith, introduce today's speaker. So first of all, if you haven't had a chance to look at our traveling exhibit from the Kaufman Museum, A Day with the Birds, that will end on April 30th. And then right after that, we have another traveling exhibit coming from Humanities Texas called Vaquero, the genesis of the Texas cowboy. And that's also going to have a paired exhibit based on local history about Buffalo County Rodeo called Dirt, Animals, and Clean Fun. So that should be really fun. We also have our annual meeting this Sunday from 1 to 3. The first part of that is for members only, so if you're a member, hopefully you've received some notice about that. If you aren't a member, the second part at 2 p.m. is open to the public, and it will feature a presentation by Mark Bauer at UNK Athletics. He's going to be talking about history of athletics at UNK, and that relates to the museum's theme for the year, which is keeping score. Next month's Fabulous Friday is going to be May 9th at 2 p.m. and that will feature Valerie Bierick from Ravenna talking about her grandfather, John Pesek, who you saw on the way in on that big old poster, big wrestling poster. So that's just a sampling of some of the things we've got going on here. If you haven't grabbed one of our calendar of events brochures, please do on your way out. It has most of the big events going on here, or check us out on Facebook, and it also has a QR code to bring you straight there. So with that, Robin's going to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Robin Smith. This is Neil Dankert. Neil lives in Elk Creek and actually lives across from my mother, and I didn't know this. He's lived there several years. And my kind of niece went over one last summer and come back and said, hey, there's this guy over there with all these butterflies. So, and I never thought much of it. Then when we wanted something to discuss, I thought, well, that might be an interesting thing to discuss. So I went over and talked to Neil last October, September. And he studies butterflies. Did you do it for UNK or the state? It's called,
just a hobby.
okay, and when I went over, the place was full of butterflies. I think it was late October, if I remember right. His little garden around the garden. He's written this book, Common Butterflies of the Central Platte River Valley. Is this called
Lepidoptera.
Okay, I can't, butterflies. Okay, well, anything else I need to say? This book, by the way, if you're interested, they have some up at the desk that are for sale. If somebody's interested in one of these books, you'd be surprised. I was surprised when I got one of these, how many there are. So, I'll let you talk, I guess. Thank you.
Yep. So, like I said, I'm Neil Dankert, and went to school back when it was Kearney State, and had him go for an advisor, and he was kind of into insects, and so we kind of got started there. And Nature Conservancy just bought a bunch of land up at the Niobrara, so he dragged me up there, and we started doing butterfly stuff there. And one thing led to another, and somebody asked me if I wanted to be the state coordinator for the Lepidoptera Society. Lepidoptera Society is butterflies and moths as an international membership. And to be the state coordinator, you report all the new findings for the state every year for an annual season summary. And so, not knowing any better, I said, yeah, I'd do it. And that was 30-some years ago. So for 30-some years, all the records for the state have crossed my desk. And met Jonathan Nicola, I don't know, 5 years ago or something. And as a result, he's a Renaissance man. He's interested in all kinds of stuff. And so together we put together that book, and then I retired from Eaton's, and I told him, anybody know what a big year is? Bird people do big years. That's, you pick a geographic area and how many birds or whatever you're surveying you can find in that area, you're doing a big year. So I was like, I don't think anybody's ever done a butterfly big year in Nebraska, so I'm gonna be the first one that set the bar. So I told him that, and he said, well, if you do that, you have to have a blog. I was like, okay, so then we started this up. So that's our website, Nebraska Lepidoptera, and it covers, somebody shoot me a guess how many butterfly species have been found in the state.
500.
1,000?
210. And if you start counting on your fingers and toes, that's quite a few different butterflies. And that ranks number 10 in the United States as far as number of species found. And they kind of, butterflies associate with certain plants. And the more different kinds of plants you have, the more different kinds of butterflies you'll have. So the mountainous states with a lot of different plant communities generally have, they're all the top 9, and our flat plain state is number 10, so we're ranking right up there. So there's the 210 butterfly species in Nebraska, and Nebraska Game and Parks has a Nebraska Natural Heritage Program, and it designates what they think might be species of concern. Tier 1 are the ones they're most concerned about, and then Tier 2 are the ones of lesser concern, but maybe keep an eye on them. And they have 8 species listed as Tier 1 and 85 listed as Tier 2. So that's 93. So out of the 210 species found in the state, just about half of them are uncommon or rare in the state. But Nebraska being a blend state between east and west, north and south, almost all of those butterflies are common somewhere else, but they just reached the end of their range in Nebraska. So, you know, if you're at the end of your range, the population kind of ebbs and flows, and so there are no rules. If you're thinking about butterflies, there's say half of our butterflies fly for a restricted short period of time during the year, 1 generation a year, and that's usually for 2 or 3 weeks, and you won't find them before and you won't find them after, and most of the time you'll just find them in a certain habitat. And so I wrote down, I found back of the envelope calculation, we've seen 39 different species in our yard in Elm Creek. So those are the ones I'm gonna go over, and those are the ones you're likely to see in your yard. And they overwinter, some of them as eggs, some of them as larvae, some of them as pupae, and some butterflies overwinter as adults. So there are no rules there. And I said a lot of them are associated with a very specific plant or closely related group of plants, and those plants are often found in specific locations like wetlands, or so they might be restricted to wetlands and fly 2 or 3 weeks out of the year, and you'll only find them there in that time frame. So won't find them in your yard. It's a good thing and not a good thing that we're not responsible for maintaining many Tier 1 populations, but the only one we have that we will find in our yards are the monarchs. And there's some literature back there, I don't know if they all got passed out. I see a lot of you have them on butterfly gardening. One of them's on butterfly gardening. They're available off the internet. The extension service has them, and they'll print them up for you, or you can look them up. But the butterfly gardening ones list caterpillar host plants as well as nectar sources. So you can't have butterflies without caterpillars, even though you like to squish caterpillars every time you see them. That ain't gonna work. So, and if you plant the plants it's not in a caterpillar's advantage to be noticeable. So a lot of them roll leaves up and hide in rolled up leaves, or they're on the underside of the leaf, but if you plant the plant, Jennifer and I found this out, if you plant the plant, it might not be the first year or whatever, but they're gonna show up. We planted a Dutchman's pipe at one of our former residences, and we were out there, we'd moved and we went back out there to check on some of our flowers, and there was a pipevine swallowtail caterpillar on there, and their residents further south, like in the Ozarks and stuff, but you plant the plant and eventually one will stray by and lay eggs, but just cause you don't see them doesn't mean they're not there. And you're doing your part, planting the plants, but it's generally accepted that in the lower single digits, maybe 5% adult or survive to become adult butterflies. And the rest of them are fed to birds and other insects, and parasites get them, and so you can't do anything about that. You just plant the plants, plant the host plants, and you've done your part. You can't control the birds and everything else, so. With no further ado, I'm gonna run this off of our website. That's another thing Jonathan and I started up. We're pretty proud of it, so. Don't have time to go through all the features. We'll just dive in. I'm gonna sit down to control the mouse, but these are all butterflies that we found in our yard, and if you plant the right plants, you can find them in your yard as well. This is a wild indigo dusky wing, and their larvae will feed on Baptisia, is where they originally started, was their original host plant, and they're becoming quite a bit more common. They've taken a liking to some, we got distribution maps on there too, but they've taken a liking to some of the vetches that have been planted as cover crops. So if you go down to Harlan County, and probably a week or two when the choke cherry starts blooming is usually when I go down there first, but they'll be all over the place because they planted some of the vetch there. And for each of the species in the state, we got the common name, the scientific name, the family they're in, their status. There's a Nebraska Natural Heritage Program ranking. That's an S3 Tier 2. You can look on that website and find out all about that. It's got the range, larval host plants that they use, flight times, how they overwinter, habitats, and where they've been found at, public areas. This is a common checkered skipper, and we're right on the edge of its wintering range, so they might not overwinter here, but they show up every year, and they've been found everywhere, but I think that's Wayne County, so somebody needs to go up to Wayne County and knock that one out, but they feed on mallows, and so hollyhocks will work, and the one they use in the wild is the purple poppy mallow, but just about any mallow you plant, they might find their way to that. This is one of them that you probably won't plant anything for, cause it feeds on weeds. That feeds on pig weeds and lamb quarters. So there's enough of them floating around that those things will find their way into your yard. You don't need to plant anything for them. And there's only 3 counties in the state where it hasn't been found, so that's another one. Take a road trip and knock those 3 counties out. That's what I did for 30-some years, was look where things hadn't been found and drive out there and see what you find. And, let's see, fiery skipper. Looking at that picture, you can see why they call it fiery skipper. It's really a bright orange. This is a southern stray, and it shows up pretty much late summer, early August every year, and it seems to be found mostly in south central and eastern Nebraska. But the larvae feed on grasses, and so they're just kind of almost a flying weed. They're a pretty butterfly, but I said they show up in numbers, so eye candy. I want to make sure this one will never show up in your yard, but I got to tell you a story about this one. The Pahaska skipper was first described by a guy from Ronald Loisler, and he was the train and streetcar operator in Omaha and Council Bluffs, but his hobby was butterflies. And he found this butterfly up at the Pine Ridge in Nebraska where it hadn't been described before, so he got to describe it, and he named it Hesperia pahaska. And pahaska is the Sioux Lakota name for white chief, and they named it after Buffalo Bill, who killed one of their chiefs, Chief Yellowhand, at the Battle of Warbonnet Canyon. And Warbonnet Canyon's out in northwest Nebraska. It's on private land, and I've driven up there and I can see the gate and the road that goes up there. Never been up there, but I think it's labeled on some maps as the Coliseum, so it's really an awesome. I'm just seeing it in my mind. If you've been up to the Pine Ridge and then you see Coliseum there, it was like, but that's where Warbonnet Creek and Warbonnet Canyon are, and that's where Buffalo Bill killed Chief Yellowhand and got a butterfly named after him, White Chief. This is a cute little skipper, and it's a resident. A lot of the other ones have been, some of them have been southern strays, but this one, the larvae feed on various grasses. Switchgrass is one. So if you plant some of the native grasses in your yard, this is one of the butterflies that we've had in our yard. We've got Indian grass and switchgrass and big blue stem, and a lot of them, if they feed on native grasses, they got a small group of them they prefer, but I think switchgrass is one sometimes you find them around wetlands and where there's a lot of switchgrass growing, so I think they kind of associate with switchgrass, and they've been found in most counties in Nebraska. This is probably the most common of our resident skippers that you'll find in your yard. It's a tawny head skipper. It's kind of uniformly brown-gray there. And it's been found in everywhere but Holt and I think that one's Wayne County. I don't know what that one was before, but need to go up there and knock them two counties out. But larvae feed on grasses again.
Question
Yeah,
is, what determines if they're called a skipper as opposed to butterfly, or not called a skipper, or what's the characteristic of the skipper? Because I noticed the very first one said butterflies and skippers.
yeah. Technically, from a biologist's point of view, skippers aren't butterflies. Butterflies are strictly defined as having certain wing venation. You know, they name all the different veins in the wings, and butterflies have a certain wing configuration, and skippers have a different wing configuration. And so they're separated into skippers, Hesperidae, where butterflies are in a different family. And so, but seeing as how they fly during the day and they're kind of colorful, most of the butterfly books include skippers. But if you want to be strictly technical about it, skippers aren't butterflies, but.
And when you're catching them, they a lot of times will be on verbena, or coneflowers and things like that, and they look like a little paper airplane.
Yep,
when
they're
you're
kind of like a jet airplane. They have the top wings are at 45 degrees and the bottom wings are spread straight out, so they kind of look like a fighter jet and everything. They fly like it too.
Yeah, they are fast.
I was like, I don't know what it's called, but one of the most important things in butterflying is having fast eyes to where you can follow something really small going everywhere. But a lot of times they're territorial, and if you wait, you know, you'll scare it off, and if you wait a minute, bang, they'll come right back where they took off from, you know, it's like, this is my turf, and I'm gonna chase girls from here, and I'm gonna chase everybody else away, so. This is a Delaware skipper, and once again, they feed on grasses, and there's another butterfly that looks about like it, but you can see the wings, the veins in the wings are scaled black, and so that's the way you separate that one from another one. This is the most there's three of them that are kind of uniformly gold on the hind wings underneath, and I call them the golden girls, and this one accounts for 95% of those, and the other two are on Nebraska's tier list. One of them was just proposed to be endangered, but has to go through all the paperwork and whatever. Near found. Just about everywhere. And it's 2:24 already. Let's go over to swallowtails.
So you have found all of these in your yard, even though Buffalo County's not highlighted sometimes?
I think all of those so far, Buffalo County's
Okay.
been shaded green.
Well, now, where it was red, does that mean that's where the buffalo or the butterflies are at?
Where it's shaded green,
Where it was shaded red? And on some of them other slides?
no. Not supposed to be any of those. There's some of these shaded light green, and those are 4-H records,
Oh, okay.
where I'm not, I'm kind of a butt, but on my spreadsheet, I like to have dates and localities, and a lot of these come from the state fair. There's a guy from Lincoln goes down and grades all the collections, and
Okay.
he just tells me Yeah, I got a record, but it didn't have a date or a locality, cause you always wanna have date, locality, and collector for all your records to make it scientifically valid or whatever, so. The ones shaded in light green are 4-H records that if I find somebody that has a bona fide verified record, I change it to dark green, but, so, these are the ones, I can't believe we don't have a caterpillar picture. But these are the striped ones you find on dill and fennel, and with the next one I'll cover, will also feed on rue. And rue, I don't think I have a picture of rue anywhere either. Stabbing at things. This is a fun swallowtail. There's a native understory plant called prickly ash that they'll feed on. But other than that, they just kind of feed on some introduced garden plants. And one of them they'll feed on is called gas plant. And I had that at one of the other places I lived. And the caterpillar looks just like a fresh, shiny piece of bird poop. And so, the birds see that, and don't need none of that, so ain't gonna feed on my excrement. But they'll feed on gas plant, that's gas plant, and I don't have a picture of rue, but if you see rue, buy some, because this one, about once or twice a year, we've got some rue in our yard, and I'll see one of those there laying eggs on it. And the black swallowtails lay eggs on it too. And so that's a multi-purpose host plant. There's 2 different swallowtails lay eggs on it. It's not meadow rue, it's rue, and it's Mediterranean is where it comes from. And you'll find it in the herb section or something a lot of times. And it's really bitter, and we've never used it cooking, but they use it to infuse oils or vinegars, or it's used in the Mediterranean region mostly. I don't know anybody who's ever used it cooking here, but it's an interesting plant, and it
gets a pretty yellow flower.
It's kind of a bland butterfly. The checkered white, it feeds on mustards, any mustard you plant in your yard, or it'll also feed on sweet alyssum. And it's common, it's found everywhere, but I think that's Colfax County. Oh, and there's a couple, Thurston and another county up there. Time for a road trip again. Everybody knows the cabbage white. I think that's one of them we've got from every county. Yep, got them all. They're just kinda, you don't need to plant anything, they'll just show up. The whites kind of feed on things in the mustard family, and then the sulfurs feed on legumes. And they're not very particular. Any legume you have in your yard, be it a Canada milk vetch, or they're not real picky. They'll also feed on alfalfa, but see, that's another common one found in every county. This one doesn't have any orange on the wings, whereas the next one, the alfalfa butterfly, you can see it has an orangish cast on the wings. So, and under ultraviolet light, that fluoresces. So insects see a different light range than we do. If you see the bug lights, I haven't seen them much anymore, but they're always that red, orange, yellow, and they don't see that end of the spectrum, infrared into the red, orange, yellow. But you see the bug zappers that are blue, they'll see the blue, indigo, violet end of the spectrum, and then they'll see past that into the blue range that we can't see anymore. So when you're looking at flowers, what you're seeing as a flower, a butterfly might see entirely different because they see the ultraviolet that you can't see that flower may possess. So, as I said, those will feed on alfalfa, so bingo, they're everywhere. If you drive by a alfalfa field, you see all the yellow butterflies flitting around, that's what they are. Here's my little favorite. Sleepy orange is a southern species, and we've lived in Elm Creek for, I don't know, a while. And we planted senna plants, which is a legume, but that's their preferred host plant is the senna plant. And they can't overwinter here, but they come from down south. Never seen them in anybody else's yard, but we've had them every year for forever except one. So if you plant the plant, they'll show up, they'll find it, I don't know how.
It gets beautiful flowers too.
Yeah, it's about 5 feet tall, you know, so you probably want to plant it in the back. Same with a lot of your this is native to southeastern Nebraska, but it doesn't make it out quite this far, but I found some for sale somewhere, and it's a perennial, so you plant it once and you're good for forever, and then it'll reseed. If you don't want them where they reseeded, then you but that's another sulfur that if you plant it, they'll show up.
Another question.
Yes.
Farmers use a lot of pesticides, herbicides, chemicals in their fields. Have you seen any that you used to see all the time that's really effective?
I think it's more habitat loss than herbicides and pesticides, because there's been places where I found one of their tier 1 species, Otoe skippers. There's places I found those 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and it was pretty good native prairie, and I'd drive by it now and I wouldn't even stop and give it a second look because the smooth brome has moved in, or they've grazed it to the ground so many years in a row that the butterflies they had nothing to live on. And so most of your rare butterflies are island populations. They're restricted to a certain wetland or a good quality tall grass prairie or something. And if you disturb those or have fire kind of regenerates prairies, but if you burn your whole prairie at once, you could have wiped out that whole population. So it's kind of, you like to make a mosaic. You burn part of it, you leave some of it for 2 or 3 years, and you graze part. I mean, get a whole different variety of conditions, and they'll kind of move around and find what they like. But when you have a catastrophic event that covers the whole habitat, they're susceptible to extinction then. But yeah, it's smooth brome grass is the plant from the devil, because you go up in Sherman County and Valley County, and you get up on top of the hills and you look down, and it's, instead of amber waves of green, it's amber waves of brome grass, and it just chokes everything out. And they brought it in after the Dust Bowl to stabilize the soil, and it's done an excellent job of that. But it brought it in from Hungary, and none of our native butterflies use it, and it's, you know, it holds the soil down. That's not all I can say for it. Oh, let's see, let's move down to some. Here's an interesting one. Who knew there were butterflies, caterpillars ate cedar trees? Kind of a cute thing, about the size of your fingernail. And they fly mainly in the spring, and then a later generation about the 4th of July or something, but now's a good time to find them when the choke cherries are blooming. And so there's 2 different subspecies. That one's kind of found in the western part of the state, and then there's a different subspecies that's found in the eastern part of the state. So you usually don't have to plant cedar trees because they do just fine on their own. But that's such a small butterfly, about the size of your fingernail, that you probably overlook it. Here's one, we didn't see it all last year, but 2 years ago, they were everywhere. And they're a southern species, don't survive our winters, and they'll lay eggs on legumes, alfalfa, and you name it. Something else, I saw them lay eggs on in our yard. Oh, Canada milk vetch, so just about any legume. And so more records from the southern part of the state than, you know, I'm sure they're up north too, but nobody lives up there that reports them or haven't driven up there or whatever, but. And I don't know whether they call it the marine blue because of the kind of waves in the wings, or, don't know how that got that name, but. Some years there's 15 or 20 of them in your yard, and some years there's none. Here's our eastern hail blue, and they're kind of fond of lawn clover. They lay eggs on legumes as well, and they like low open areas. So if there's a path through a prairie or something with lawn clover in it, a lot of times there'll be a lot of these around. I don't know that any of them survive being mowed. When you're mowing your yard, you have clover in it, but these will almost always show up in your yard every year. Oh, I've lost my map somehow, but. See my rambling on. Here's an interesting one that doesn't overwinter here as well, but it's called a snout butterfly because it's modified its front legs and part of its face to look like a snout. I don't know if you can see it very well there, but those live on caterpillars, feed on hackberry trees, and so they'll breed here. They'll show up from down south and they'll breed here, but they don't overwinter. So if you have hackberry trees in your yard. This cute little thing, it's about the size of your fingernail again, but Gorgon checker spot, and it's got some arrowhead shaped markings on the hind wing there. And its caterpillars eat sunflowers, and they'll also eat coneflowers. Dr. Brust from Shadron found a picture of a whole bunch of caterpillars. So they'll just skeletonize. I forget what year it was. You could drive down the highway and you just see coneflowers that were they just had the mid ribs and very little left of. They just enjoyed a big boom that year. But sunflowers will feed those. We found caterpillars in our yard. This one, the caterpillars feed on asters, and this is a pretty oh, I got my maps back. So I think that's just, can't remember what county that is, but need to go down there to wipe that one out. If you click on the pictures, they get bigger. Jonathan took every one of these pictures. He doesn't do anything second rate. These next two will feed on their dead leaf mimics, and they'll feed on wood nettles and hop vines and elm trees. And then there's some few others, but so we've got some hop vines planted on our fence, so, and I don't tell anybody, but I planted wood nettles and I dug up some wood nettles and put them in my yard, so they invaded my wife's flower bed now. But I'm the only person who's ever put wood nettles in their yard. Shame on me. But.
And they overwinter as adults.
Yeah, these overwinter as adults. And these are called question marks. Because you can see that silver mark, and then it has a separation space, and then there's a dot. So somebody decided that looked like a question mark, so those are called question marks. And then the next one is called a comma because it doesn't have that separation, and it feeds on the same thing. Overwinters as an adult as well.
And they could be coming out now, right?
Yeah.
They could be coming out now, so.
So you can see that one just has that comma on the hind wing. So you gotta get a pretty good look at them before you can tell what they are. That's surprised, that should be found in every county, so we got a lot of work to do on that one. Oh, we're at 45.
Yeah, we probably have time for like one or two more and then we'll open for questions.
Okay.
Show buckeye.
This is the one, if you buy a butterfly raising kit, this is the one they'll send you, and that's a painted lady, and they'll feed on everything. And found in every county in the state, but some years are big boom years, and farmers will report them as caterpillars eating their soybeans. So I mean, the place you find them most often is on thistles, and they'll go out in the prairie and find a thistle, and the leaf looks kind of chewed up, and there's some webbing there, and if you give it a look, there's a painted lady caterpillar there. And we'll just go over to monarchs. This is the latest population trend. So we're way over there on the right. And so last year was a terrible year. They calculate the area that the monarchs take over winter to see how many of them there are in Mexico. And so they occupy twice as big a territory this year as last year. So it's great that we doubled, but if you look at the long-term trend, that's still a pretty low number. And so that's one of them you can help in your yard. And I heard one guy say, well, I planted a milkweed and there's nothing on it. And he's kind of like, oh, maybe it takes a little more than one to get their attention or something, you know. So if you have a corner of the yard, and they'll kind of spread too. And once you get one going, then they'll start to sucker up, because you see milkweeds, you usually see them in a bigger bunch. But if you can, got a little area set aside where you can plant some milkweeds, that's awesome. And then if we can get that red. Chickadees need to find 350 to 570 caterpillars a day to feed their chicks. And then he's had a deal on native plants. He looked at a native white oak and found 430 caterpillars from 19 different species. And he looked at a nearby Bradford pear, and he only found one caterpillar. So if you plant native plants that the insects can use, you know, you raise some butterflies, but a lot of it goes to support other wildlife too, you know, birds, and if you're a birder, and like I said, you can only plant the plants, and whatever happens from there, you might get some butterflies, and you might just raise a bunch of birds, but, you know, so. Okay, I'll quit rambling. Questions?
Hey, what's the difference between a butterfly and a moth? Are they the same family, or?
Yeah, butterflies and moths are Lepidoptera, which is Latin for scaled wings. Because, you know, if you take a butterfly or a moth and you rub the wings, that coloration comes off. It's all scales on the wings. So they belong to the same order, but just like butterflies and skippers, they separate them by structure and, you know, wing venation and stuff like that. And actually, I made a little factoid somewhere else on that website for another time. There's a spreadsheet of all the moths that we found in the state, and I just added 5 more to it yesterday. But there's 210 butterfly species found in the state and almost 1,500 moths. So there's over 7 times as many moths as there are butterflies. So any native plant that you plant, even though it didn't maybe raise a butterfly, there's probably a moth that's laying an egg on it. But, you know, so it's just kind of, if you can, plant native plants. And if you can't find it locally, there's a guy in Lincoln, Nathan Duffy, has Midwest natives, and he's got an actual greenhouse And there's another place, Prairie Legacy, down in southeast Nebraska, has all kinds of stuff. And they're a mail order only, but each one of them has like 6 or 8 different kinds of milkweeds. And, you know, if you go to your, you know, patronize your local place, but how many kinds of milkweeds are they gonna have, you know, I mean, so, you know, those places have a big abundance of a whole bunch of different native plants, so I'm kind of, that's exclusively behind my garage, and it kinda turns into a jungle, and by the end of the summer, you can't hardly walk through it. But, you know, and Jennifer has a more structured garden, which is what you saw, but, so, anyway, all right.
Well, I had another one. At Road Sanctuary last month, they said they were tagging butterflies,
Yeah,
which makes you wonder how they do it and how tiny is that little tag? Or what kind?
that tag is maybe a third the size of your fingernail. And that's part of the Monarch project. And it's out of the University of Kansas, and you send in, and they send you some sheets, kind of like wax paper, and they've got little adhesive tags on them, and you catch the monarch. And on the underside of the hind wing, toward the bottom, to keep the center of gravity toward the base of the butterfly, you put that little adhesive tag, and then you turn them loose, and they got people in Mexico looking for, not everybody survives the winter in Mexico and they overwinter, so they have people hired there going through the dead monarchs on the ground looking for tags, you know, so. I did that for a couple of years, and then it got to where I got enough of a tremor or a shake that I was like, no, I was dinging up the butterfly worse than I was helping the population or anything, so I kinda quit, but got the nieces, kids going, they really loved it, they'd go catch the butterfly and bring them back, they'd put the tag on and away it went, but, so.
And if they're found somewhere, there's a website, like if you can.
Yeah,
it's found
if you
in the-
find one that somebody else tagged, you report it into that website, and then you go back and check the next spring or whatever and see if any of yours were found, and I did that for about 5 years, and none of mine were ever found, but the chances of that happening are like winning the lottery or something, so.
Do most of these butterflies migrate like the monarchs do?
Monarchs are they're really the only one that make a migratory round trip. A lot of that come from the south, we got a lot of southern strays every year, and most of those don't make a return trip. They just expand their territory, make use of the resources that are here, and then they can't overwinter, so they die during the winter, and the next year a new crop of butterflies comes in. But really the monarch's the only one that really makes a round trip migration, and the one that flies down is not the one that flies back, and vice versa, the one that flies south is not the one that flew north. So they got it imprinted in their DNA that, you know, it's the grandkids of the ones that are coming north that fly back south, so how they figured that out. Yes?
Yes, I was curious about the use of permethrin, in the mosquito fogging that happens in towns.
Yep.
I'm trying to opt out of this in COZAD, and I was just wondering, how does the permethrin in particular affect monarchs and our natives and all of that?
I am not aware of particulars, but I'm sure it's not good. And I'm kind of, they fog at Elm Creek too, and it was like public health or whatever, it takes a higher priority than, you know, butterflies don't pay taxes. That's, everybody, how come there's not as many butterflies? Like, well, they don't pay taxes. But, yeah, I'm sure any pesticide that you apply, you know, and if you use something in your garden, I'd recommend, it's a detergent, or insects breathe through pores in their abdomen, and insecticidal soap. And insects breathe through pores in their abdomen, and if you spray them with the soap solution, the soap covers those pores, and then they can't breathe and they die, so. But it's kind of a contact thing, you have to spray the actual insect. You're not killing the plant, you're not poisoning their food, and therefore, I mean, if you're spraying something on your tomatoes, you can wash your tomatoes off and wash the soap off and you can eat them, but yeah, it's like BT corn has a pathogen embedded in the corn, and I've asked different people, corn pollen blowing onto milkweeds in the ditch, you know, how does that affect the monarch caterpillars, you know, because BT is a pathogen to larvae, and there's no set research on it yet, so it might have an adverse effect on those two, so.
How about when they pollinate, are they really big pollinators, butterflies, or is it?
Butterflies are kind of eye candy, but they're not really big pollinators. It's bees do most of the pollination, and I'm doing a senior college course in June on insects, and I got a bee person coming in the last session, but she's from Omaha, but there's most of your native bees aren't hive dwellers, they're solitary bees, like mason bees. If you buy those little bee houses with bamboo hole, you know, and Jonathan Nicola has one in his yard, he converted his little front yard to a native plant thing, and he just got activity coming and going out of there, and he lives in the middle of Kearney, but the native bees, the mason bees and the leafcutter bees, if you put those little houses up, I put one up in my backyard, the grapevine kind of covered it up, but I've had mason bees there, and I've seen leafcutter bees cut, you know, having circles cut out of some of my leaves on my stem. So if you put those little bee houses out, surprisingly, you know, they look kind of cheesy, you know, but they actually do get used, and John's is just sitting out there and right in the middle of the, you know, fully exposed to the sun all day long, and I kind of hid mine, sheltered it in the grapevine, because I was like, man, they can't take that heat, but yeah, evidently they do, but, so, yeah, butterflies, truth be known, aren't that great of pollinators, but they sure are pretty.
Well, I guess if there's no more questions, thank you, Neil,
Yep.
for this.